So you were originally from Cleveland, Ohio, is that correct?
I was born in Cleveland, Ohio, grew up in Cleveland, began my journalism in junior high school, and there was a public address announcement. This was September of 1951. Anybody who wants to work on the New School newspaper, please stay after school. And as my wife would say, that's what I've done ever since, staying after school or after work. When it came time to graduate high school, I chose Ohio State University. No, I was not on a football scholarship, and I didn't go there for the football team, but I went to the state capitol thinking that would be a great place to learn journalism. And where I learned my journalism practical was working on the school paper, The Lantern, both as a reporter, as an editor, and striving for public service.
Did you think you knew a lot about journalism when you finished at Columbus?
I've never felt I know enough, and I'm not saying that just for this interview. The best actors are those who say, even after they've won Academy Awards or Tony Awards, they still go on to every stage, every night, like it's their first night. That's the way I do my teaching.
So obviously you reflected that view by going on to graduate school right after.
Sure, and there was a reason.
What was the reason?
The reason was that my greatest mentor in my life was the late George J. Kinzel, who was the director of the School of Journalism at Ohio State University. Professor Kinzel said, "Myron, I want you to go get a master's degree at the Columbia Graduate School of Journalism so that you can teach someday." And fast forward from 61, about 45 years later, I went back to Ohio State to receive Distinguished Alumni Award, and I dedicated my speech to George Kinzel. And he was known as George to everybody. He sadly died of cancer a few years after I graduated. And I said, "George, I kept my word to you to teach, except I had a detour around the world for 4 decades, so I had to wait about 40 years, and I'm doing it at GWU, not OSU." And it was, I still think of him.
When you started at Columbia, did you think you were going to teach earlier? Teach sooner?
Well, I thought, first of all, George Kinzel said he wouldn't want anybody to teach at Ohio State without at least 5 years professional experience. So what happened was six weeks before graduation from Columbia, I was hired by the AP. Graduation came at Columbia, and at the graduation awards luncheon, the names of 3 winners of the Pulitzer Traveling Fellowship was announced, which is generally for the 3 top members of the class. And that fellowship, you received a $2,000 stipend toward travel expenses so that you can hopefully do some reporting abroad. And I didn't even know that award existed, to be honest, and my name was called for one of the 3. So my life changed because of Columbia, and particularly because of the Pulitzer Traveling Fellowship. And my first staff assignment was in November '66, as I mentioned, to India, and that had a particularly major benefit, turning point. I always teach my students when they're writing their profiles, try to find that turning point where somebody was heading back to Ohio, but instead went overseas. It was the Pulitzer Traveling Fellowship. It was to go to India. So I had the ability and the freedom to hire somebody, and I met a Fulbright scholar who was eager to be a journalist, who had been stringing for Time magazine, who was an excellent writer. And so I hired him. And a few weeks later he said, "Myron, you cannot live and work in the AP office 7 days, 24 hours. This was in August. And he said, "Let's drive out to Old Delhi, where I want to introduce you to a nice Indian student who is returning to finish her master's degree in the Delhi School of Economics." And so we drove out. It was August 10th. And there she was on the corner waiting for a bus to go into New Delhi. I was the driver of the car. And to make a long story short, our first date was to go to the Rashtrapati Bhavan, the presidential palace that was once home of the viceroys. And that began our relationship, and we were married on November 23rd, 1969 in New Delhi. And here we are. We'll be, it'll be 48 years this year that we've been married, and we have 2 children who were also born in New Delhi, and they both have done well. So this shows you how, that's why I call myself the lucky kid from Cleveland who thought I would remain in Cleveland.
Did your kids grow up thinking they were American or British or Indian or just a conflict?
I think they grew up being the children of a very busy father and mother, and they grew up, well, they were in the American school in London. They grew up as international, I would say, very proud of both their American heritage and their Indian heritage. Of course, we're proud of where we were born, we're proud of where we grew up, but we mustn't forget that we're part of a larger world community, and that's particularly important for journalists. My last active day with the AP was as I was finishing my assignment as Tokyo Bureau Chief, and it was April 15th, 2004, and the government knew that I was finishing my career. We were invited to the annual Sakura, the cherry blossom festival reception on the grounds of the Imperial Palace, that reception being hosted by the Emperor and Empress of Japan. And as the Emperor walked by, we spoke briefly with him. And then when the Empress, Michiko, came by, she spoke perfect English. I wish you the best. Journalists are so important for ensuring that society is better informed about what is happening. And thank you for informing the rest of the world about Japan during your time in Tokyo. And we live a life that we should not and cannot script, but how appropriate on my last hours with the AP before retirement, in quotes as my wife would say, to hear the Empress of Japan say those words.